You'd think that being the chief of police would give you a little respect in your own neighborhood. I mean, I spend my days keeping the town safe, solving problems, and making sure everyone follows the law. But apparently, none of that matters when it comes to the homeowners association, or as I call them now, the HOA cops. These people, they don't care who you are or what you do for a living. All they care about is their precious rulebook. It all started with something so small, you wouldn't believe it could spiral into anything serious. One evening, after pulling a double shift at work, dealing with everything from car accidents to break-ins, I came home exhausted. My usual routine was to park my car in the driveway, grab a quick bite, and crash on the couch. Simple, right? Well, not this time. The next morning, I opened my front door to find a piece of paper stuck underneath. At first glance, it looked like just another flyer or maybe even junk mail. But no, it wasn't. It was an official-looking letter from the HOA. In bold letters across the top it said, ***, violation notice, ***. I squinted at the words, trying to make sense of it. What kind of violation? Had I accidentally left the garbage bins out too long? Did one of our outdoor lights burn out without us noticing? Nope, none of that. The letter explained, in very formal language, that my car had been improperly parked within the HOA's designated boundaries, and because of this serious offense, I owed them $79. I read it twice, then 3 times, shaking my head. Improperly parked? Seriously. I hadn't blocked anyone's path, damaged property, or caused any trouble. My car was sitting exactly where it always sat, in my own driveway. This couldn't be real. It felt like some kind of prank. Claire, my wife, walked up behind me while I was still staring at the letter. She leaned over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said, raising an eyebrow. "They really went for it this time." "They can't be serious," I muttered, crumpling the paper in frustration. "This isn't about parking. It's about control." But Claire didn't laugh. Instead, she gave me that look, the one she gives when she knows I'm in denial. "They're serious, Jack. You know how they are. Rules are rules around here." She was right, of course. Living on Blue Ridge Lane meant playing by the HOA's rigid standards. Everything had to be perfect. Manicured lawns, spotless sidewalks, and cars parked only in certain spots at certain times. But this, a $79 fine for leaving my car in my driveway overnight. It felt absurd, almost insulting. Still, I tried to brush it off. "Fine," I said, tossing the crumpled letter onto the counter. "I'll go talk to them. Explain that there's been a misunderstanding. They'll back down once they realize how ridiculous this is." Claire crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow again. "Good luck with that," she said dryly. "Remember what happened last month when Mrs. Patel put up those wind chimes? They fined her $50 for noise disturbance. That stopped me cold. She was right. The HOA didn't mess around. If you stepped out of line, even in the smallest way, they'd come after you. Hard." As I stood there, fuming silently, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really about following rules? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker? Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to end with just a simple conversation. And boy, was I right. The next morning, I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Screeching tires. Not the kind you hear during a high-speed chase or an emergency stop, but deliberate, slow-motion screeches, like someone was intentionally dragging something heavy across asphalt. At first, I thought it might be construction work nearby. But when I pulled back the curtains and looked outside, my jaw dropped. There, right in front of my house, were 2 bright orange traffic cones blocking my driveway. And standing beside them were 2 men dressed in neon vests labeled HOA enforcement. They weren't just casually placing the cones there. They were staging some sort of spectacle. One guy held a clipboard, jotting down notes as though he were documenting a crime scene. The other snapped photos of my car with a camera phone, circling it like a hawk sizing up its prey. What on earth? I muttered under my breath, throwing on my robe and rushing outside before I could overthink it. The chilly morning air hit me as soon as I stepped onto the porch. By then, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, some curious, others amused, and a few who seemed downright entertained by the chaos. I marched straight toward the two men, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Excuse me," I said loud enough to grab their attention. "What is this? Why are there cones in my driveway?" The taller of the two turned to face me, his expression smug. He looked me up and down, clearly unimpressed by my bathrobe and bare feet. "Sir, your fine has escalated due to non-compliance," he announced, as if reciting lines from a script. "Until payment is received, further action will be taken." I blinked at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Further action? You've blocked my driveway." He shrugged like it was no big deal. "Rules are rules, sir. Parking violations carry consequences." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. How could they do this? This wasn't about enforcing reasonable guidelines. This was pure intimidation. My mind raced. Who did these guys think they were? Did they have any idea who *I* was? Then again, maybe they didn't care. Maybe being chief of police meant nothing to them compared to their precious HOA handbook. As I stood there fuming, I noticed Mrs. Patel watching nervously from her lawn across the street. She gave me a sympathetic wave, but quickly retreated inside her house. Other neighbors whispered among themselves, glancing between me and the HOA enforcers. Some even pulled out their phones to record the scene. Great. Just what I needed. A viral video of me getting publicly shamed over a parking ticket. "This is ridiculous," I finally managed to say, pointing at the cones. "Move them. Now." The shorter man smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Can't do that, sir. Orders from above." "Above?" I repeated, incredulous. "Who's above?" "Mr. Grayson." They exchanged a glance but didn't answer. Instead, they went back to taking pictures and scribbling on their clipboards, acting as though I weren't even there. It was maddening. For years, I'd dealt with real criminals, people breaking laws that actually mattered. And here I was, powerless against a couple of glorified meter maids armed with traffic cones. By now, Claire had joined me outside. She placed a calming hand on my shoulder, though her expression mirrored my frustration. "Jack," she whispered, "don't let them get to you. We'll figure this out." But figuring it out wasn't going to be easy. As I stared at the blockade in my driveway, I realized something. This wasn't just about a $79 fine anymore. It was about principle, about standing up to bullies who hid behind rules and red tape. If I backed down now, what message would that send? Not just to them, but to everyone else on Blue Ridge Lane. So I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and vowed silently that I wouldn't give in. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. By noon, the entire neighborhood seemed to know about my standoff with the HOA. Word travels fast in places like Blue Ridge Lane, where everyone's lives are intertwined by proximity and shared routines. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispered on their porches, or casually strolled past my house under the guise of walking their dogs. Some gave me sympathetic nods. Others looked downright gleeful, as if they were watching a live episode of reality TV unfold right before their eyes. Mrs. Patel, bless her heart, finally mustered the courage to approach me. She shuffled across the street, clutching a cup of tea like it was some kind of protective shield. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as she glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one else was listening. "Chief," she began hesitantly, "maybe you should just pay the fine. You know how they are. They don't back down." I stared at her, incredulous. Pay the fine? After all this, the cones, the cameras, the clipboard-wielding enforcers who treated my driveway like a crime scene. It felt wrong, like admitting defeat in a battle I hadn't even started fighting yet. "I'm not paying them," I said firmly, louder than I intended. Heads turned from nearby yards, and I could feel the weight of curious eyes on me. Lowering my voice, I added, "This isn't about money. It's about principle." Mrs. Patel sighed, shaking her head. "I get that, Chief. But these people, they're relentless. Trust me, I learned it the hard way." She gestured toward her porch, where a pair of wind chimes once hung. They'd been replaced by an empty hook after she got fined $50 for noise disturbance. Never mind that the wind chimes barely made a sound unless there was a hurricane. Her words hit home, but they only fueled my determination. If we let the HOA push us around every time, what would stop them from taking things further? What was next? Fines for watering our lawns at the wrong time of day, for painting our front doors the wrong shade of white. Later that afternoon, I tried calling a local tow truck company to remove the cones. Surely, someone could help me reclaim my driveway. But when I explained the situation, the dispatcher sounded nervous. "Sorry, sir," he said apologetically. "We can't interfere with HOA property disputes. Company policy." Company policy. Since when did private organizations dictate what businesses could or couldn't do? It was infuriating and eye-opening. The HOA's reach extended far beyond our little cul-de-sac. Their influence seeped into every corner of daily life, twisting rules until they became weapons. Jake, the young dad 3 doors down, offered to help drag the cones away himself. He showed up with work gloves and a determined look on his face. "Let's move him," he said, flexing his hands. "They can't stop all of us." As much as I appreciated the gesture, I stopped him before things escalated. Physical confrontation wasn't the answer. Not yet, anyway. If we crossed that line, we'd be playing directly into the HOA's hands. They'd paint us as troublemakers, rebels stirring up chaos in their otherwise perfect neighborhood. Still, the frustration gnawed at me. Every passing hour felt like another victory for them, a reminder that they held the upper hand. And then there was Claire, who had been quietly observing everything from the sidelines. She knew me well enough to see the storm brewing inside me. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she spoke up. "You're letting this eat at you," she said gently, resting a hand on mine. "But remember why you're doing this. This isn't just about you. It's about setting a precedent. About showing everyone here that they don't have to live in fear." She was right, of course. But hearing her say it out loud made the stakes feel even higher. If I gave in now, I wouldn't just be surrendering my dignity. I'd be sending a message to the entire neighborhood that resistance was futile. And deep down, I refused to believe that. So I nodded, forcing a smile despite the knot in my stomach. "You're right," I said. "We'll figure this out, together." But as darkness fell and the orange cones remained stubbornly planted in my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Things reached a boiling point the next evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I was sitting on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to calm my racing thoughts, when I heard the unmistakable hum of an engine pulling up across the street. My gut tightened instantly. Something about the sound felt deliberate. I turned to see a sleek black SUV glide smoothly to a stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Mr. Grayson himself, the man behind the curtain, the puppet master of the HOA. He looked every bit the part today. Tailored suit, polished shoes, aviator sunglasses perched on his nose like he was auditioning for a movie role. His presence commanded attention, and within moments, neighbors began peeking out their windows or stepping onto their porches to watch the show. Grayson strode toward me with purpose, his steps measured and confident. There was no hesitation in his demeanor, no trace of doubt or uncertainty. As he approached, I stood up, setting my coffee mug aside. This wasn't going to be a casual chat. I could feel it in the air. "Chief Bennett," he greeted me coolly, extending a hand that I didn't shake. "I hear we have a bit of a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I echoed, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. You've barricaded my driveway because of a $79 fine. He adjusted his sunglasses, his lips curling into a patronizing smile. Technically, Chief, it's now $158 due to non-payment. And obstruction of HOA enforcement carries additional penalties. My jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. Obstruction. Penalties. The word sounded absurd coming out of his mouth, like he was reciting lines from some twisted script meant to intimidate people into submission. But I wasn't about to let him rattle me. Not here. Not now. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Grayson, I said, taking a step closer. My voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. I enforce laws, not petty tyrannies disguised as rules. You may run this neighborhood like your personal kingdom, but out there, I pointed beyond the cul-de-sac toward the rest of the world. I'm the one people call when real problems arise, problems that actually matter. For a split second, his composure faltered. The smug grin slipped slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But I caught it. Good. Maybe he'd underestimated me before, thinking I'd fold under pressure. Now he knew better. But Grayson recovered quickly, smoothing his expression back into its usual mask of superiority. Be careful, Chief, he said, his tone icy. Rules exist for a reason. Ignoring them has consequences. Oh, I know all about consequences, I shot back, leaning in slightly. And trust me, Mr. Grayson, if you keep pushing this, you'll learn exactly what they look like. The tension between us was thick enough to slice with a knife. Neighbors who had gathered nearby whispered nervously, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the fireworks. Even Claire emerged from inside the house, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She gave me a cautious look, silently urging me to stay calm. Grayson held my gaze for a moment longer before finally breaking eye contact. With a curt nod, he turned on his heel and walked back to his SUV, sliding behind the wheel without another word. As the vehicle pulled away, leaving nothing but the faint smell of exhaust in its wake, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Well, Claire said softly, breaking the silence. That went well. I snorted, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, sure. Real productive. But deep down, I knew this confrontation changed everything. Grayson wasn't just some minor nuisance anymore. He was a direct opponent, and judging by the look in his eyes, he wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. That night, after the showdown with Grayson, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at each other across a spread of papers and coffee cups. The frustration radiating off me was almost palpable, but Claire's expression was calm and calculating. She tapped her fingers lightly on the table, her mind clearly working overtime. Okay, she said finally, breaking the silence. Let's think about this logically. What's the HOA's biggest weapon? I raised an eyebrow, not sure where she was going with this. Their rulebook? Their fines? Those ridiculous neon vests? She shook her head. No, it's fear. They thrive on making people too scared to push back. But you're not just anyone. You're the chief of police. You've dealt with real criminals, real emergencies. These guys are amateurs compared to that. Her words sparked something in me. She was right. The HOA operated like a shadow government, hiding behind vague rules and threats of penalties. But what if we exposed them? What if we dragged their antics into the light for everyone to see? We hit them where it hurts. Their reputation. Claire continued, her voice growing more animated. If they want to play hardball, fine. Let's show the whole town, and maybe even the country, what kind of nonsense is happening here. By morning, we had a plan. First, I drafted a formal complaint to the city council, laying out every absurd rule and penalty imposed by the HOA. I included photos of the blocked driveway, copies of the violation notices, and testimonials from neighbors who were willing to speak up. Mrs. Patel agreed to share her story about the wind chime fiasco, and Jake wrote a paragraph about how his mailbox got flagged for being painted blue instead of white. Slowly but surely, the pieces came together. Next, I tipped off a local news station. Reporters love stories about suburban drama. It's relatable, infuriating, and oddly entertaining all at once. Within hours, a young journalist named Lisa arrived on our doorstep, notebook in hand and camera crew trailing behind her. She listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally glancing at the orange cones still blocking my driveway. "This is unbelievable," Lisa said, shaking her head as she scribbled notes. "People won't believe it unless they see it for themselves." "Exactly," I replied, gesturing toward the chaos around us. "And that's why we need to shine a light on it." The next day, the story broke. Headlines blared across social media. HOA blocks chief of police's driveway, over $79, fine and suburban showdown. Residents fight back against overzealous HOA, neighbors texted me screenshots of comments flooding in from strangers, some outrage, others amused, all curious about what was happening on Blue Ridge Lane. As the story gained traction, reporters camped out near my house, interviewing residents and capturing footage of the infamous cones. One neighbor held up a sign that read, "Is this really about safety or control?" while another joked about starting a GoFundMe to pay off the HOA's imaginary fines. The absurdity of it all made national headlines, turning our quiet little neighborhood into the center of attention. Watching the media circus unfold felt surreal. For months, the HOA had operated in secrecy, enforcing rules no one fully understood. Now their actions were under a microscope, and they didn't like it one bit. Claire stood beside me on the porch as cameras flashed and microphones jutted toward us. "Well," she said with a satisfied smile, "looks like the tide is turning." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. We weren't done yet, but for the first time, I believed we might actually win this fight. The press conference was chaos, organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Reporters packed onto my front lawn like sardines, their cameras flashing and microphones pointed at me like weapons. Neighbors lined the street, some holding signs that read "Freedom over fines" and "HOA gone wild," while others simply watched with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. For a neighborhood that prided itself on quiet, orderly living, this was anything but. Standing on my porch with Claire by my side, I took a deep breath before stepping forward. The air buzzed with anticipation, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of murmurs rippling through the crowd. Then, silence fell as I cleared my throat and began to speak. "This isn't about me," I started, my voice steady despite the swarm of attention. "It's about accountability. The HOA exists to serve residents, not bully them. Yet here we are, debating whether someone's choice of parking spot warrants a public shaming, or worse, retaliation." Behind me, Claire held up a handmade sign that said, *******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************̈̈̈ The reporters ate it up, snapping photos and shouting questions faster than I could answer them. One journalist called out, "Chief Bennett, do you think the HOA has overstepped its authority?" I nodded firmly. "Absolutely. These rules aren't about protecting property values or maintaining standards. They're about control. And when people try to stand up for themselves, they're met with intimidation tactics like blocking driveways and escalating fines. That's not leadership. That's abuse of power." As if on cue, Mr. Grayson appeared across the street, flanked by two members of his HOA board. He looked disheveled, his usual polished demeanor replaced by sweat beading on his forehead and a nervous twitch in his jaw. He tried to push his way through the crowd, but the reporters turned their focus to him immediately, bombarding him with questions. "Mr. Grayson, can you explain why the chief's driveway was blocked? Are these enforcement methods standard practice for your HOA?" How do you respond to claims that your actions have gone too far? Grayson stammered, clearly unprepared for the sudden spotlight. This is being blown out of proportion, he insisted, his voice trembling slightly. The HOA operates within legal boundaries to ensure compliance with community guidelines. Without such measures, neighborhoods would fall into disarray. His words landed flat, met with skeptical stares and muttered retorts from the crowd. Even some of his own board members seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and shifting awkwardly where they stood. It was clear they hadn't anticipated the backlash, or the scrutiny, that came with national media coverage. One reporter pressed harder. So blocking a resident's driveway because of a $79 fine is considered ensuring compliance. Grayson hesitated, then straightened his tie as if trying to regain composure. Each situation is unique, and decisions are made based on established protocols. But his explanation only dug the hole deeper. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief, and someone shouted, "Protocols? For what? Running a dictatorship?" The tension reached a breaking point when Mrs. Pottle stepped forward, clutching her wind chime story printed neatly on a piece of paper. Her voice wavered at first, but she quickly found courage as the cameras turned to her. "They fined me $50 for hanging wind chimes on my porch," she said, her tone firm now. "Wind chimes? Can you imagine? My grandchildren gave them to me as a gift, and the HOA treated it like a crime." The room erupted again, this time with applause. Jake followed suit, sharing how he'd been penalized for painting his mailbox blue instead of white. "It's not about rules," he concluded. "It's about control. And enough is enough." By the end of the press conference, the HOA's reputation was in tatters. Social media exploded with hashtags like #FreeBlueRidgeLane and #HOABulliesExpose. People across the country weighed in, sharing their own horror stories about overzealous homeowners associations. What had started as a personal fight became something much bigger, a movement against unchecked authority and unnecessary oppression. As the reporters packed up and the crowd dispersed, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph. We weren't finished yet, but one thing was certain. Mr. Grayson and his cronies had finally been forced to face the consequences of their actions, and judging by the looks on their faces, they weren't happy about it. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and satisfying. The media coverage didn't just shine a light on the HOA's antics, it practically set them ablaze. Once the story went viral, there was no turning back. Emails poured into the city council from residents across town, outraged neighbors, and even strangers who dealt with similar issues in their own communities. Pressure mounted on the HOA to justify its actions or face serious consequences. One by one, cracks began to form in the organization's polished facade. Several board members resigned, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew it was because they didn't want to be associated with the growing scandal. Mr. Grayson himself disappeared from public view for days before issuing a terse resignation letter. It was vague and defensive, blaming miscommunication and external pressures, but nobody bought it. His reign of control had officially ended. The city council launched an investigation into the HOA's practices, uncovering a laundry list of questionable decisions and unfair penalties. They found instances where fines were handed out arbitrarily, rules were applied inconsistently, and enforcement methods bordered on harassment. As a result, new regulations were put in place to ensure oversight and transparency moving forward. No longer could the HOA operate like a shadow government. Now, they had to answer to someone higher up, the people who actually paid their fees. For me, the victory came quietly one morning when I stepped outside to find the orange cones gone. My driveway was clear, unobstructed, and free once again. Claire greeted me with a triumphant grin as she sipped her coffee on the porch. "Looks like freedom wins after all," she said, raising her mug in a mock toast. I chuckled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But more importantly, something shifted in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves started talking, really talking, to each other. Mrs. Patil organized a block party to celebrate our newfound unity, complete with homemade dishes and music courtesy of Jake's guitar skills. Even old Mr. Thompson, who rarely left his recliner, showed up to share stories about how he'd been fined years ago for letting his grass grow half an inch too long. At the party, I stood near the driveway, watching kids race around without a care in the world. A few reporters lingered nearby, capturing the feel-good moment for follow-up stories. One of them approached me with a microphone. "Chief Bennett, what's next for Blue Ridge Lane?" she asked. I smiled, glancing at Claire and then at the crowd of smiling faces. "We're rewriting the rules," I said simply. "Not just for ourselves, but for every neighborhood that deserves to live without fear of petty tyrannies." By the end of the day, hashtags like #NewBeginnings on Blue Ridge and #CommunityOverControl trended online. People shared photos of wind chimes hanging proudly from porches, blue mailboxes standing defiantly against conformity, and driveways filled with cars parked exactly where they belonged. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress. That night, as Claire and I sat on the porch watching the stars, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. We hadn't just won a battle against the HOA. We'd sparked something bigger, a reminder that standing together could overcome even the most stubborn obstacles. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder, breaking the comfortable silence. "Well, Chief," she teased gently, "you might not have solved any crimes this week, but you sure did save the neighborhood." I laughed softly, pulling her closer. "Let's hope we never have to do it again." And for the first time in months, I believed her.